Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Fantasy Baseball. I am John Kuh, and I am joined by Patrick Fitzgerald. In this episode, we are going to go over the latest news and notes around baseball, recap the hitter and pitcher performances from this past week, and, of course, give some streamer recommendations at the end of the show. But before we get into all that, Patrick, how are you doing? How are your fantasy teams doing? And how's your real baseball team doing?
Hey John, I'm doing well. Pretty mixed results on the team so far. Pretty good. I got a 12-0 lead in one of my Yahoo matchups right now, so I'm pretty fired up about that. Real team's doing all right. The Orioles are closing out a win as we speak. First time this year winning two straight games, which is pretty hard to believe, but it's true. And yeah, just wanted to give a shout out to my late round sleepers we talked about. My first time being on, Dylan Moore and Pavin Smith have been going off lately, so that's been pretty fun to see. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I went to 3 games over the weekend to watch the Twins, and they lost all three
Nice.
of them. So that's that's how it works. They did finish their last 2 games against the Mets with wins, which was nice to see. A little bit of signs of life, but unfortunately, in getting those wins, a bunch of players on the Twins got injured. So it is what it is. Yeah, I was gonna say Dylan Moore, 2 homers a couple days ago. I don't think we're talking about him during this podcast, but that was kind of a nice little showing from him. Unfortunately, I don't know how consistent that's going to be. He is in Cincinnati, right, for these games, so maybe he might hit a homer today. We'll see. But yeah, the nice little performances from those guys for sure.
Yeah, it'd take anything you can get. I think he's up to 5 steals now, and he's not going to play every day, but he's playing close to every day now with the Ryan Bliss injury. So
Right.
you know you can't count on him hitting 300 forever, anything close to it. But the homer speed stuff, that might stick for most formats. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, exactly. Just kind of have to hope that over the next week while he's hot, they're not playing too many games in Seattle because that park will eat up all your hits.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's a little tough there. But yeah, we don't necessarily have a hitter streamer segment, but for sure, guys like Dylan Moore and Pavin Smith are on your waiver wire. So pick them up if you need some of that middle infield help, or if you just need help anywhere. In the case of Dylan Moore, since he's got second, short, third, and outfield eligibility. At least on ESPN, I would assume so on Yahoo and Fantrax as well.
Yeah, and Smith's got the first base outfield, I think, in most non-FB NFBC formats. So if they're playing righties, he's going to be in there, and they score a lot of runs. So
Yeah, that Arizona offense is still looking pretty good. Just starting we're back
mhm.
right up from where they were ending last season. Anyways, before we get into the rest of the show, just a reminder that you can follow our podcast on Twitter at ThisWeekPL. Send us your fantasy baseball questions to our email, thisweekplpod@gmail.com. Lastly, make sure you subscribe to or follow the podcast on whatever streaming platform you listen to your podcasts on. We're on all of them again: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever else you listen. Make sure you follow us, leave a 5-star review if you enjoy listening to the show. We are going to dive right into some injury and transaction news, and we are starting off with a guy we recommended in the streamer segment last week. He had a nice little outing before getting pulled. Richard Fitz of the Boston Red Sox unfortunately landed on the 15-day IL with a right pectoral strain, and it sounds like he'll probably be on there for more than just the minimum stay. Another big blow to pitching. Justin Steele of the Cubs is now out for season with a left elbow injury. I think the doctors are still deciding whether he should be getting Tommy John or that internal brace procedure that a lot of pitchers have been getting recently. But really unfortunate for Steele. He was looking really good for a couple weeks, and then all of a sudden it feels like this injury came out of nowhere. So unfortunate there for a lot of pitching staffs who probably were relying on Justin Steele. I know I had him on I think 2 different teams. So kind of scrambling to figure out how to deal with that loss from my
Yeah,
rotation.
tough guy to replace for sure.
Yeah, I
Big
think I
big
mean
loss.
like Justin Steele 2 years ago was a Cy Young candidate. I think he finished second in the NL voting. Last year he was pretty solid, like not necessarily a top tier pitcher, but pretty good. And this year there were signs of him like kind of at least maintaining that skill level, if not better. So
Mhm.
yeah, missing a guy like that is pretty huge. Another injury in the NL Central, Quinn Matthews. He is on to the minor league IL. He was not called up yet, but there was kind of thoughts that with how poor St. Louis pitching is, they might call up Quinn Matthews at any point. But he is now on the injured list with left shoulder soreness. Another minor leaguer, Samuel Basallo, of the Baltimore Orioles, is on the IL with hamstring strain. He's at least the top three prospect in the Orioles organization. I know it's probably a mix between him and Kobe Mayo, as who's the first guy to get called up. But Basallo, a lot of promise there. Unfortunate that he's hitting the IL as well. Matt Wallner of the Minnesota Twins is going on to the 10-day IL with a left hamstring injury. The Twins ended up making a corresponding move to pick up Jonah Bride, I should say,
Hmm.
from the Marlins, but I don't think they've put him on the 40 man yet. So there's some. We'll see what the Twins do. They've got a bunch of injured players right now, and don't know who's going on the IL yet, who's staying. But we will mention one call up that they are making a little bit later in this podcast. And then finally, Christian Encarnacion Strand of the Reds is going on to 10-day IL with a lower back strain. So, out of these six guys, obviously we just talked about Justin Steele. Any of the other notable ones that you think would warrant some further conversation?
Yeah, Steele's definitely the big blow. I mean, that's a huge loss for the Cubs and for our teams, like you were saying. Basayo, as an Orioles fan, super excited about him, but not super redraft relevant anyway. So this pushes back the timeline even more, probably to late 2025 at the earliest. And then with Fitz, it was going to get interesting with the Red Sox rehabbing pitchers. They have Bayo and Giolito pretty close to returns, and it seems like Newcomb's going to lose his spot, and it seemed like Fitz was going to be the other one. So I guess that kind of eliminates the drama of how they were going to treat that. But hopefully it's not a long term thing because he showed, he hasn't broken out, but he showed that he can be a competent starter at the major league level.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, even with Giolito and Bayo coming back, this team's a little shaky in the rotation, right? Walker Buehler hasn't really shown any incredible stuff just yet for the
Mhm.
team. And so even with Fitz and Newcomb, like Newcomb wasn't doing that great, but Fitz was actually kind of showing some promise and being like a guy who could save with the rotation. I would not be surprised even if they end up sending him back to AAA after he's back from the IL that he makes more appearances with the major league team this season because I think he's shown that he's at least able to hang with the major league rotation with this Red Sox team.
Yeah, I mean, they had Tanner Houck absolute blow up earlier this week. I think it was 10
Yeah.
earned runs or something. I mean, he was a
Yeah.
great story the first half of last year, and now it seems like he's struggling to even get guys out at all. So, really quick turnaround.
Yeah, I picked up Tanner Houck for a stream.
Oh,
Which
no.
like that's kind of the thing, right? Like you never wanted to do Monday streams. So I was like, it's a good matchup. Uh and yeah, it was not a good matchup. So
That was
that was
that
a
was me
brutal
with
way.
Chris. Yeah, that was me with Chris Paddock in the
Yeah,
first week of the
exactly.
season. So,
Yeah, it's never good when you look at your team ERA on Monday and it's like 10 runs. It's just not a good feeling at all.
big hole
Uh,
to dig out of.
exactly. Yeah. Thankfully, I think my opponent in that league is also having a not great day in the ERA department at least. So it is what it is. All right, looking at some big returns from the injured list, we have two pitchers. Clark Schmidt of the Yankees. He pitched 5.2 innings against the Royals in his first start back from the injured list. And then Spencer Strider of Atlanta pitched 5 innings against the Blue Jays on Wednesday, and we'll talk about Strider's start in a little bit more detail later on. But just curious, did you have any thoughts on the Clark Schmidt start and what this means for the Yankees moving forward?
Yeah, my biggest takeaway from both of these was that it was just nice to see them take on close to a full workload in their first start back. Clearly the teams let them get pretty built up in the minors so that they didn't have too many limitations. And with the Yankees, yeah, I mean they need all the arms they can get right now. They got Heel and Cole injured and Stroman on the IL, which might not be the worst thing in the world. But yeah, it's just good to see these guys back on the mound and give their teams a little bit of length too. Hopefully they can both get to 6+ next time out.
Yeah, especially for Atlanta, cycling through a bunch of the young pitchers, right? Like Bryce Melder had come up, AJ Smith-Shawver were kind of the two pitchers who were cycling a little bit back
Mhm.
and forth. But with this Strider start, I believe Smith-Shawver got sent down to AAA, and I think that's probably for the best. He did need some seasoning. He didn't look incredible in his major league start, so giving him more time to develop. Obviously, he's only 23. Just is a good thing for Atlanta in general in the development of that rotation. Especially since some of the other pitchers aren't doing that hot. I mean, I know Chris Sale's not exactly having the greatest start to his season after winning the Cy Young. I know Grant Holmes has had some pretty tough matchups to start the year as well. So just getting another hopeful ace level pitcher in Strider is going to be really good for the rotation as a whole.
Yeah, yeah, Schwellenbach got bombed this week too out of nowhere, so you never know what you're gonna get. I feel like there's been a lot of pitchers. I think Castilla struggled this week, Framber Valdez, obviously Hauk. So there's been a lot of bad outings. So yeah, you never know what you're gonna get with some of these guys.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about it, but Roki Sasaki got absolutely shelled by the Cubs as well over the
Mm.
weekend. So yeah, just a lot of shaky performances from pitchers so far, which usually isn't the case. Usually the pitchers are actually the ones who are dominating early season, and the bats, warm up as the season goes on. But yeah, it's been a little bit tough for pitchers this first couple weeks of the season. All right, moving on to some other injury news. We are going to start with Zach Neto of the Angels. It's looking like he should be activated soon. He did play 9 innings in a game at shortstop. We are recording this on Thursday, so it's a good chance by the time this podcast comes out that Neto has been called up. But it could be anytime this weekend that they bring him back onto the major league roster. Francisco Alvarez of the Mets could be activated before the end of the Mets homestand on next Wednesday. We'll see if he's fully healed from, I believe it was the broken finger for Francisco Alvarez, or broken hand
Yeah,
that put him on the
handmade bone,
IL.
something like that.
Yeah, so we'll see if he is able to get back and join the team by next week. Brandon Woodruff of the Brewers had 66 pitches in his first rehab start. His second one is today on Thursday. No word yet on how that's going. His teammate Tobias Myers got up to 5 innings in his second rehab start earlier this week and is expected to have one more rehab start tomorrow on Friday. And once that's complete, I would probably expect him to get called up to the major league roster. Pablo Lopez of the Twins, again, he was on the 15 DIL last week because of some hamstring injuries. He's getting a rehab start on Saturday in AAA. The Twins are pretty much expecting him to spend the minimum amount of time on the injured list. And so I believe he would be able to rejoin the team by the time his next start rolls around next weekend. Marcelo Ozuna of Atlanta has been out the entire week with hip inflammation. Keep track of his status. He hasn't played in a couple games, so the Atlanta could kind of backdate his time on the IL if they end up deciding to put him on the injured list, but no word yet on if that is happening. Tony Gonsolin of the Dodgers, 66 pitches in his most recent rehab start, probably could join the team next week or soon afterwards. And we'll see if that means that they put them into a 6-man rotation. Interesting enough, they had Bobby Miller come up for a spot start yesterday, which I thought was kind of an interesting move. But yeah, Gonsolin is probably going to rejoin the rotation. I don't see a situation where they decide to put him in long relief. They'll probably have a 6-man rotation for the time being until Shohei comes back, and then they actually decide what to do with the rotation. But yeah, all these pitchers here. Any thoughts on their status on coming back, and especially the other two players I think of importance, Neto and Alvarez. Both those guys. Do you feel like either of those should be a pickup in leagues, or would you want to wait and see how they kind of come back and acclimate to major league play?
Yeah, Neto, I think is close to an all formats pickup, even except maybe if you play in like an 8 team league or something. He's a guy who, he's like a 25-25 threat over a full season. He should hit near the top of the order. The Angels, they're not a great team, but the lineup has been surprisingly good this year. So I think that he's pretty much an all formats play if he's available. Alvarez, I think in most shallower one catcher leagues is like a watch list guy. He obviously has been good and in spurts and has great prospect pedigree. But the success hasn't always been there. So I think if you have a good catcher, don't worry about it. If you're looking to maybe make a change, just keep an eye on how he does when he gets activated. And then with the pitchers, it's nice to see the rotation reinforcements on the way for Milwaukee. They're also having Logan Henderson get called up this weekend to make his MLB debut, who's a prospect of some repute. So hopefully he does well and he can stick and these guys get added. But yeah, a lot of moving parts coming up in Milwaukee. So that'll be interesting to see what they do. And then in Minnesota, I'm hoping that Pablo Lopez replaces Chris Paddock and maybe kicks him to long relief and they keep Festa in the rotation because he's looked pretty good so far.
Yeah, I think with Neto, I would not be surprised if he's rostered in most most leagues. If he was,
Hmm.
kind of a late round draft pick and then put on IL, if your league has IL spots. And I think with Francisco Alvarez, having just watched the Mets in Minnesota, I think Luis Torrens actually adds a decent defensive factor to um, the Mets infield, and so I would not be surprised if they, bring Alvarez back a little slowly, just because Torrens has done a pretty decent job behind the plate. At the plate, Alvarez is probably still the better hitter, but
Definitely.
I would not be surprised if they have like a pretty equal timeshare to start out with, and then maybe Alvarez, kind of gains the job back slowly. So I currently agree with you on at least one catcher leagues. I probably would not be going out to grab Alvarez at this point.
Yeah.
All right, looking at some other pitchers who are having some rehab starts. So Lucas Giolito just had 60 pitches in his third rehab start. Will likely need one more before he comes back and rejoins that Boston rotation. Clayton Kershaw of the Dodgers had his first rehab start, pitched 30 pitches, but because he's on the 60-day IL, he is not eligible to return until the end of May. And honestly, I would not be surprised if the Dodgers keep him on the IL a little bit longer, just because they might not necessarily need to add him as quick, and they'll probably take Kershaw along very slowly in order to add him to their rotation. Ranger Suarez of the Phillies had 54 pitches in his most recent rehab start. He'll probably need one more before he gets called up to the Phillies. Brian Bayo of the Red Sox, 71 pitches in what is likely his last rehab start. Would not be surprised if he joins the team next week. Lance McCullers Jr. Had his likely last rehab start this weekend in Double A. I am kind of curious if he has a spot in this Houston rotation. Again, he hasn't pitched in nearly 2 seasons. Um, there is some shakiness with the Houston rotation, but I think they've found some success with the pitchers in the back half of the rotation, specifically Hayden Wesneski, who's been really really good. Do you think McCullers is a lock to rejoin the major league team once he's back from injury?
Yeah, I think that he is just because of the Arrighetti injury. I think of Ryan Gusto is their fifth starter right now, and he like threw 4 innings and gave up 3 runs in his only start so far. So it would have been interesting to see what they would do if Arrighetti hadn't gone down. But I think because of that, McCullers should slot in the 5 spot. And yeah, it's nice to see Wesneski get that little extra run in the rotation because he's been good so far, and he might have been in jeopardy of getting pushed out if Arrighetti hadn't gone down. So I think I don't know what to expect from McCullers. I think he's sitting like 91 in his rehab assignment, which is not great, but
Yeah.
it'll just be fun. It's a guy who's really struggled with health and has been electric at times. So I think he'll be like, a 5 inning guy in the back of their rotation there.
hmm They do have a pretty good bullpen, so that kind of helps with a guy who can't give you 6 innings. Moving on to some batters, Wyatt Langford of the Rangers is beginning a rehab assignment in Triple A. Mason Wynn, who we cursed last week, is beginning a rehab assignment in Triple A as well. Ketel Marte, who is dealing with a hamstring injury, he took live batting practice this week, so slowly ramping back for Marte. Ronald Acuna Jr. is now cleared to begin ramping up activity. He is progressing towards a rehab assignment. Again, would not expect him to return until the end of May. Grayson Rodriguez was unfortunately scratched from a side session with shoulder soreness. He's going to undergo an MRI just to see if there's anything else that they can figure out with his injury. And then finally, Tyler Stevenson is dealing with an oblique injury on the 15-day IL, and he could begin his rehab assignment next week. And potentially provide a little bit of oomph to that Cincinnati lineup. So with any of these guys, obviously with some of these guys, right, like Wyatt Langford, Ketel Marte, Acuna, and maybe even Stevenson, they're just sitting on the ILs for your team. With a guy like Grayson, though, at what point are you just keeping him on your IL for this point, or do you think it might be another lost season for him, just seeing as he's dealing with more setbacks?
Yeah, this was really concerning to see because it's a tricep elbow injury was initially diagnosed, and now he's having shoulder problems. This is really, really just as an Orioles fan, very disappointing and, hoping for the best. I would just take a look at who else is IL eligible in your leagues to be added just because it's going to be a long hold here. So if there's, nobody's coming to me right now as someone who's going to be out for like a month, maybe like Ryan Weathers or like Max Scherzer, right? Somebody like that who's not quite as good of a pitcher as Grayson Rodriguez, but has at least a little bit clear of an injury timeline. I would wait and see what they say about the MRI and stuff, but he might be a guy who you want to drop for a better IL stash at some point pretty soon, just because it could be, he could come back in like August, and who knows what your team's going to look like at that point.
Yeah, he's been on my TGFBI team because I
Mm.
drafted him. And it was like, it seemed like pretty good value when I picked him up. But yeah, with this news, it's kind of like, oh man, if he's on the IL for another 4 weeks, I don't know if I can maintain that spot in TGFBI because there are no IL spots, right? Like he's basically just taking up space on my roster for no good reason. Um,
Yeah. Even
and
I think even in that format, it's 15 teams, right? So it's super deep
yes,
league, 450 players roster, but I think you got to cut them. I mean, I'm playing in an online championship where I have Woodruff and Neto. I took them as stashes, and then Ketel Marte went down. It's getting really dicey, and I was able to hold on to them both, and it looks like I'm going to get them back pretty soon. Not Marte, it doesn't seem like, but Woodruff and Neto. So it's really tough in those no IL leagues.
yeah, for sure. All right, and then finally some news. Luke Keeschall of the Twins, he's a second baseman prospect, top 100 guy or top 100 prospect, is getting the call up for the Twins. No corresponding move has been announced yet, but Willie Castro and Carlos Correa both went down with injuries earlier this week. Keeschall is coming back from Tommy John surgery. He got Tommy John last August, so he's likely only coming up as a DH type of player. And so we'll see if there's a corresponding IL move for the Twins. But yeah, kind of maybe I don't know if he's the first big call up. Sure, there's a couple other top 100 guys that have been called up already this season, but yeah, kind of a big. I don't know if you necessarily need to go out and grab him, but he is probably going to get some playing time at least for a week or so. If you are in a deep league and you need some help at the middle infield position. Keeschall had like a 780, I think, OPS in the minors this season. And so he could provide some interesting pop off the bat if you're looking for some help there.
Yeah, he's like a nice hit over power prospect for your deeper leagues, maybe in like the Allen Road and like similar, mode to that. And I actually was looking at him today when I saw he got called up in my Yahoo league for whatever reason. He has eligibility at first base, second base, and outfield. So, if you need someone to round out your roster and just kind of mix in when guys have off days or are sitting, he's not the worst option in maybe like your 15 teamers.
Yeah. And then one other small move, it'll probably be resolved by the time this podcast. Actually, it definitely will be resolved by the time this podcast comes out. But Alex Bregman got put on the paternity list,
Mhm.
and he is due to come back, I believe, on Saturday, because it's a maximum of 3 days away from the team, and he got placed on the paternity list on Wednesday, I believe. So he missed Wednesday, Thursday, no game, Friday, missing that game, and then he should be back on the roster on Saturday. All right, that is it for the injury news, and we are going to move into player performances. So, starting with Friday, April 11th, why don't you start us off, Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely. On the 11th, we had Justin Wainwright on our hitter recap article with Yiner's Club talking about a nice bounce back game for Yiner Diaz. But I'm actually going to talk about one of the best hitters in the league so far. That's Jung Lee on the San Francisco Giants outfielder. On this day, he went 1 for 2 with a homer, 2 runs scored, 3 RBI, and 2 walks. And he's just been mashing really. The Giants season this far has been an interesting one, right? They in that loaded NL West, they currently sit in third place, even though they're 13-6, and they started out 8-1. So Lee has really been their most consistent player throughout this entire stretch. He's hitting 348 right now. He leads the league with 10 doubles. And he's a guy who, came over from the KBO, pretty highly touted guy. He's another hit over power guy for sure, especially playing in San Francisco. And as a result, he doesn't have the most exciting profile, but we're really getting to see, what he's capable of in terms of like a great average. And he's starting to show a little bit of speed too. I think that he doesn't have that like tantalizing profile where, he could go 20-20 or whatever, but he has a great hit tool and he's showing a lot right now. So I'm wondering what you think the upside is on someone like Lee. Could he finish with like I don't know, what would be an aggressive prediction, a top 25 outfielder season or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with Lee coming over from Korea was his incredible OBP, right? That's kind of the main thing. The guy was able to get on base and get on base pretty consistently. And then, if he's got some speed, that's got to help as well. I feel like the aggressive prediction is like going 2020 and he bats like 300, which would be incredible. I don't think that's going to happen necessarily. I think
Mhm.
he's probably not going to be batting 300. He'll probably go back down to earth a little bit. I think 2020 is like maybe a little bit in his grasp. He has 3 home runs and 3 stolen bases through 76 plate appearances, so it does not extrapolate to a 2020 season. Also playing in Oracle Park probably doesn't help him
Yeah.
getting some homers too, especially as a lefty. So I think aggressively, could he finish as a top 25 outfielder? I think that's definitely doable. I think he'll be, serviceable in all categories, which is pretty nice. Don't think that would be a consistent thing with a lot of other guys who are in that, outfielder two range. And so, yeah, I think that's actually pretty doable. I think what will be interesting is to see where his average ends up, right? Is he going to be batting around 300, or is he going to kind of come back down to earth and be batting more in like the 260, 280 range? If he's
Yeah.
300, I think that makes him a lock to be like, one of the better outfielder twos in fantasy baseball this season.
Yeah, I think he could be close to a 300 true talent hitter, really, if he keeps the K rate down. I mean, it's a pretty impressive profile. He's also going to rack up runs, which I think is probably the most underappreciated fantasy hitting stat. I would say I kind of think of like runs and whip as
Mm-hmm.
analogous stats on the hitting and pitching side. Like everybody wants to know how many home runs and RBIs your hitters have, and everybody wants to know how many, what your pitcher's ERA is, right? Maybe how many strikeouts he has. But I think that whip and runs get a little bit slept on and undervalued as a result. So Lee could put together, just a really quiet season of really strong production.
Yeah, completely agree with that. It's kind of the one that you kind of take for granted, right? Because you're like, yeah, my guys are gonna score runs. But even though he might not be elite in the home run or stolen base department, yeah, being able to get around the bases and get you those runs is pretty crucial.
Yeah, it kind of seems like a Reyes type profile, but in the outfield with maybe a little bit more power, power
Yes,
speed.
definitely. He's going to finish with more than 10 homers this season.
Yeah, hopefully. But yeah, on the pitching side for the 11th, I want to talk about someone who's actually been a little bit uneven so far this year. Nick's SP roundup that day was the Pivetta Quest 10, focusing on Nick Pivetta, who strung together or has continued to string together great outings, including another good one yesterday against the Cubs. But I'm going to talk about Bryce Miller. He took a no decision against the Rangers on the 11th. He went 5 innings, gave up 1 run with 2 hits, 3 walks, and 5 strikeouts. So pretty good outing. 14 whiffs, but only a 23% CSW on 100 pitches. So not efficient, but he did a good job keeping runs off the board. Um, he also went five. I think it was 5 scoreless yesterday against Cincinnati.
Yes.
But they pulled him after like 75 pitches, which I was a little surprised by. But yeah, what we saw in this start on the 11th was a lot more heavy usage on his patented four seam fastball. And he was mixing in a sinker against righties a little bit, which is like a nice taste breaker offering. But he's still struggling to really command and be effective with his breaking balls. Flashed some good moments with the splitter against lefties, but Nick in his roundup is just wondering at what point do we just kind of accept Bryce Miller as a fastball first guy who really struggles with the breaking ball, and that does put a little bit of a limit on his ceiling. Something that I kind of noticed, I have Miller on one of my teams, and he has a 3.43 ERA so far, which is fine, but a 1.33 whip, which is definitely a little concerning. And his stuff just kind of seems like it's regressed this year. It's not quite the same guy that we are used to. And I think a lot of that is from his four seam, right? He's known for having a great four seam that plays up super well in the zone, gets a lot of swing and misses, but his release point has actually climbed up this year by like, I think it was 5.6 feet last year and it's like 5.9 feet this year. So it's gone up by like 4 inches, which doesn't seem like a big difference, but it really has affected the shape of the pitch. And we have a metric over at Pitcherless, which is HAVAA, height adjusted vertical approach angle, which has to do with how well the shape of your fastball plays, basically based on where you release it, the movement characteristics. And one is average, and then the higher above one is like a fastball that is really going to play well up in the zone. And his used to be 1.4 last year. Now it's all the way down to zero point 0.9. So it's kind of like an average shape fastball. So I was kind of concerned to see that, big shape change for what I consider to be his best pitch. So I'm feeling a little uneasy about Miller right now.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, a couple things that are going wrong with Miller because earlier this year, I was on a podcast with Nick. We were talking about a mock draft that we did in late 2024, and we had picked
Hmm.
up Bryce Miller on our mock team, and we had talked about, what is Bryce Miller really good? Like, can we really believe in the breakout that he had last season? Right, 2.94 ERA, 0.98 WHIP, not an incredible strikeout rate, only 24%, but the guy was really good last year. Right, 18 quality starts. You can't
Yeah,
deny
absolutely.
his impressiveness there. And then I was looking at what are his numbers this year. Right, it's only over 4 starts, so small sample size, disclaimer, all of that. He's got an 11.8% walk rate, which is almost double what he had last season, 6.4%. He's had games where all four of his games so far, he's walked at least two batters, and the strikeout numbers haven't been great. Like up until his game yesterday against Cincinnati, all his other outings only had four strikeouts. Right, so the strikeout numbers are a little bit down as well. The rates are about the same, but I think when you only talk about a 4 game sample, rates are kind of they're not as descriptive, right? So like even though he's walked so many guys, he actually had a walk issue last year. It just so happened that it was spread out over a lot of games in this case. But I think the one thing that's interesting about his four seamer is its zone rate. So 53% zone rate last year, only a 43% zone rate this year. Right? He's not throwing it in the zone, and you're seeing that dip in called strikes. 13.1% called strike rate last year, 7.8 called strike rate this year. That's fifth percentile among starting pitchers. So
Wow.
he's just not getting called strikes with the four seamer, and it's mostly a location issue for him. It's not that he isn't pounding the zone. He isn't pounding zone. That's the thing, and I don't know if it's because he was playing with that release point, like you were mentioning. The and again, like I think with fastball shape, I'm not the biggest nerd about it. I don't know all the metrics that go along with it. But one thing that's really weird, I think, about this year, beyond just what you were talking about his height adjusted vertical approach angle, is
Hmm.
his IVB is like an inch more. He's producing more vertical movement with his fastball, 9.1 inches compared to 17.7 inches last year. And I don't know, for you, like I think there's a limit, right, to how much vertical movement matters, right? I think we usually say the sweet spot's around 17, 18 inches. Getting 19 inches of vertical movement isn't necessarily like a great thing, right? For Bryce Miller, maybe that's why he's missing the zone so much. Is he's just getting too much vertical movement on his pitches or on his fastball specifically.
Yeah, I think that you have to kind of think of it holistically. Like when I think about someone's fastball shape, I think about their movement, both induced vertical break and horizontal break. I also think about release point, primarily how high they're releasing the ball, what their vertical release point is. And then obviously the velocity, right? So those are kind of an extension, right? So those are
Yep.
Nick's, Fab Four characteristics, right? So his extension has gone down a little bit, actually, too. I didn't mention that before.
Yes.
His vertical break has gone up, right? So that's good. Velocity about the same, and release point has climbed up. So I think that the combination of the release point climbing up and the extension going down a little bit has outweighed the slightly increased vertical
Mm,
break. So the
yeah.
shape of the pitch, I think, is just a little bit worse. And we're seeing it in the results, right? Like you said, the called strikes are down, the swinging strikes are down, and that's kind of the pitch that he has built his arsenal around. So that might be why we're seeing him mix in like sinkers and other pitches like that, is because he's trying to kind of reconfigure things because he doesn't have the same stuff that he had last year, which that's kind of hard to figure out on the fly. So I think we'll see how he does. I mean, he's going to be pretty much an auto start in Seattle, right? His home road splits, like most of their staff, are very stark, over a run ERA difference. But I think he's going to Boston for his next start, and I'm probably not going to start him unless like I absolutely need it.
Yeah, I think when he's in Seattle, it makes a lot of sense, right? But it could be weird for this guy to be relegated to someone who you really only trust in home games, right? If because this was a guy who, I mean, Nick has him 29th on the list right now, right? If he sometimes becomes a guy where you can't trust him as much when he doesn't have the safety net of T-Mobile Park, that's really tough. It's hard to rely on a guy who you might not be able to trust. Let's just say 30% of the time.
Yeah, yeah, I think he'll end up being a guy. I mean, it depends on your format, obviously, but I feel confident with him in like 80% of starts, like
Hmm.
all home starts and then neutral road matchups and against worse offenses, right? Like, I don't think I want to start him in Fenway Park, but I'll start him like against Cincinnati, right? Not a great park, but a bad offense. I think that's still a pretty easy start for a guy like Bryce Miller, despite some of the struggles we've seen.
Yeah, moving on to Saturday's games then. Thanks to Kevin O'Brien for the Shono Murphy hitter recap article, of course, referring to Sean Murphy. But we are going to talk about Michael Busch of the Cubs. 3 for 5 with a double, a home run, 3 runs, and 2 RBI. Again, this was the game where the Cubs put up 16 runs against the Dodgers. Roki Sasaki just getting absolutely shelled. And Busch helped with that, hitting a homer off Sasaki in the second inning. Busch has been really solid this year so far. 284, 360, 567 slash line. In 5x5 leagues, he ranks as the 7th best first baseman right now, which is pretty good considering that he had a 252 ADP in drafts. Obviously, the Busch, he really solidified that first baseman position because the Cubs traded away Cody Bellinger. And I think there was still probably not a lot of trust in that, like, the Michael Busch that we saw last season was going to be exactly the one that we saw this year, but he seems to be doing pretty well. Any thoughts on Michael Busch and maybe where his ceiling could be as a first baseman this year?
Yeah, he's been really impressive. I think that, when you combine this with last year, it seems like he's got, just great skills at the plate. I think that the average that he's posted so far is not really reliable, but the power definitely is. I think his ceiling is it's not top tier because he is mostly still used as a platoon bat. He's gonna sit against some lefties. But if you see the Cubs starting to run him out there against lefties, then that would be huge. But right now, I think that he's a 250, 25 homer bat who's going to play, 130, 140 games just because he'll sit against the lefties. But Chicago seems to have a really strong offense. So I think that he's going to post, solid counting stats despite the platoon status. I think in shallower leagues, you might want to have another first base eligible player just so you're not missing out on volume when Busch sits. Maybe someone who has multiple eligibility like Cody Bellinger or like I think Jake Berger might have first, third eligibility in some leagues, or like a deeper call like Pavin Smith, somebody like that. I think would be a nice pairing for Busch.
Yeah, one thing that maybe is a little worrying is the lower walk rate this year, 6.7% compared to where he's been the last, at least last year at 11%. So his OBP is like really good at 360, but it's all kind of driven by that average right now. So I would say in OBP leagues, there's a little caution there. Would expect that to go down. But if he does kind of find that plate discipline again, we could see that number, kind of stabilize right around the 350, 340 range, kind of where he was at last year, maybe a little bit better. So yeah, Michael Busch, definitely someone to keep an eye out on. But like you said, there's a little bit of platoon risk. He has played the last 6 straight games for the Dodgers. He was pinch hit a couple times, or he was a pinch hitter a couple of times the week before because they had him out. They had him out of the lineup against lefties.
Yeah, he's really seemed to return good value so far. Maybe the walk rate will go up. I feel like he's hitting for a lot of power right now, so he's just being aggressive because he's in a groove. But I would expect it to climb back up. He kind of posted really consistent, strong, just overall numbers and walk rates throughout the minors. So I trust his approach at the plate.
Yeah, moving on to pitchers. Thanks to Nick for the artisanal cooking SP roundup article, and we are going to talk about the main character here, Luis L. Ortiz, who is now in Cleveland. I forgot that happened. But yeah, he is now in the Guardians pitching factory. He faced Kansas City on Saturday, 5.2 innings with 1 run, 1 hit, 2 walks, but 10 strikeouts, which is kind of the insane number here. We really had to talk about this start because it's dramatic difference than his previous 2 starts. The main difference here for Ortiz was better control over his sliders. His four-seamers were better located at the top of the zone. If you just kind of look at his where his pitches were landing in this one start compared to where his other 2 starts were been, it's just better control. It's just you kind of see a better grouping of his pitches. There really isn't too much special with his fastball shape, though. If you look at it, he's got an okay extension, 6.7 feet. He's got a below average IVB at 12.1 inches. That being said, though, I think if it's located well at the top of the zone, I think it still plays. And of course, we're recording this on a Thursday. He gets Pittsburgh tomorrow. He gets to face his old team. Obviously, that offense is not very good. You'll know how well that start goes by the time that you listen to this episode. Ortiz, I think, is a very interesting pickup, though, in most leagues. Probably maybe 8 or 10 teamers is where maybe I'd stay away. But I think he's got some promise. I think we just probably need to see more consistency from him because again, this was a great start, and his passage starts just weren't that awesome.
Yeah, yeah, I would say he's pretty much a no-brainer stream against the Pirates, just given the offensive struggles that they've had. In terms of his long-term viability, it's a little more unclear. But yeah, to connect this with the Bryce Miller discussion earlier, so like we said, Bryce Miller has 19 inches of IVB on the fastball, and Ortiz only at 12. But the reason why his plays up is because how low he releases the ball. So his vertical release point is 5 feet, which is in the third percentile. So he's releasing the ball almost lower than any other pitcher in the league because he kind of slings it from a sidearm slot. So when he's able to release the ball low, it stays on a flatter plane, to the plate when he gets it up. So the pitch still does play pretty well up there, despite the, kind of the iffy movement of it. So that's kind of how those factors, really interact. But yeah, I was surprised to see this from Ortiz. He was really bad in the spring, and then had a pretty bad first start. And I was kind of like, he was a guy I was interested in deeper formats, and I was just kind of off him, after seeing all those struggles. But he seems to have really turned a corner here. So I hope it goes well against Pittsburgh, and then I think he'll be like a little bit of a matchups play going forward. But you know, Cleveland, we know what they can do, right? So maybe they figured something out here.
Yeah, just a few notes on who his next starts are. He gets the Yankees next Wednesday,
Oof,
so I would not
don't do that.
recommend. Yeah, I would not recommend that one. He will not be in the Boston series, but Cleveland gets to play. I'm currently looking this up right now. Don't know who Cleveland gets to play next, but yeah, you probably skip him for that Yankee start for sure. He gets to play Minnesota next, so pick him up for that one for sure. He's gonna be amazing in that one, 100%. He's gonna finish with like 12 strikeouts. So calling it now. Yeah, so Ortiz, I think, is an interesting pickup. There might be a little bit of helium for the Pittsburgh start, but I would expect that you skip him for the Yankee start. Probably assume whoever picked him up might have dropped him because they don't know what his next scheduled start is, and then you pick him up against Minnesota.
Yeah, yeah, I like that approach. He's definitely a good matchups play who clearly apparently has some upside with the 10Ks. That's not something we're used to seeing from him.
Yeah.
So jumping to Sunday, April 13th, we had Kevin O'Brien on our hitter recap article, and he actually profiled Jung-Hoo Lee first in this one with the Lee's All That was the title on that one. But since I already talked about Jung-Hoo Lee, I'm going to talk about Trevor Story, another bounce back guy. He is in Boston, shortstop. He went 3 for 4 on the 13th with a double, a homer, a run, and 3 RBI. And Story has demonstrated to fantasy managers this season that he is not ready to escape the spotlight. After only 106 plate appearances last year, he stayed healthy to start the year, and he's hitting 299 with a 767 OPS. On Sunday, he hit his third home run of the year, and now he's up to 3 homers and 6 steals, and he might be on his way to a big rebound here. This is a guy who used to put up crazy fantasy seasons in Colorado. He's really struggled to stay on the field in Boston, and now it seems like he might be bouncing back. So are you buying into this, John, or do you think this is just a hot stretch from Story?
I mean, I think the thing with Story is just health, right? If he's healthy, he's pretty decent. Um, and I think being a righty at Fenway can only be a good thing. And so, to me, I think you just run with Story until he gets hurt. I think that's the way it goes, right? He
Yeah.
he is showing um, really good plate appearances, though, right? Like he's batting around 300, which is far better than he's batted ever since I guess 2020 when he batted 289. It's been downhill from there ever since. So the fact that he's in approaching 300 territories is pretty awesome. I think the 6 steals are huge if he really has the speed back. This is a guy who, if healthy, could maybe be looking at like a 15-20 season. And so I think for Story, you kind of go for it as long as you can. And the strikeout rate still isn't pretty. The walk rate is definitely not pretty, but I like Story as an option on your fantasy teams. And if you were able to pick him up in a draft or maybe a first week waiver wire, I think you just keep him until the next inevitable injury comes for him, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree with that. The strikeout to walk stuff is a little concerning, but it seems like he's just kind of sacrificing the plate discipline for the sake of barreling up the ball. which has gone well so far. I think it might mean he's a little bit of an average risk, but yeah, I think you just got to ride it out. It's not like he's a guy who has a ton of trade value, so you're kind of working with found money here. So I think you might as well just keep going.
Yeah, I think key number here maybe is a 413 BABIP, right? Maybe speaks to a little bit how unsustainable this might be.
Yeah,
But that being said, I think, once he starts slumping, you probably don't lose too much by cutting him, right? Uh, no one was drafting him as a top 10 shortstop. So, once you cut him, it's because you're able to, work a guy who probably was a late round pick into someone who was a legitimate rotation player. So it's kind of like how we treat, kind of the bottom of the rotation pitchers, right? As long as they're hot, you keep them. And as soon as they kind of show a little bit of decline, I think that's when maybe it's ready to cut bait.
yeah, yeah. And track how much he's running too. 6 steals so far. That's pretty impressive. So if he keeps that up, even if the average tanks, he's still gonna give you some value. So the pitching performance on Sunday, probably the most exciting arm so far this year. For the first month of the season, that's Hunter Green. He went against Pittsburgh, so easy matchup, but he absolutely dominated. He got the win with 7 scoreless innings, 2 hit, 1 walk, and 8 strikeouts. 16% or 16 whiffs and a 37% CSW on 98 pitches. So he just completely took them to the woodshed. It was a great performance. Nick gave him the Ace is going to Ace label after this one. And he's moved up to 12th on the list. So big bump for Hunter Green. He's sitting 99 on the four seamer. And the sliders, he's really commanding the pitch well with over a 60% strike rate. The fastball shape was a little bit worse in terms of the vertical break, but it's still 99, and he's spotting it well. And he, seems to have really turned a corner. He's a guy who the upside has always been, just something to dream on. But he's pitched in a difficult park, and his fastball has, kind of been susceptible to the long ball over the years. But he's just absolutely dominated so far this year. I think he's kind of made himself the leader in the clubhouse for the Cy Young. And I think he's getting some buzz there. So I'm curious if you think that that's realistically, could he really spike a Cy Young season? Is that something that we could see from Hunter Green this year?
I think it's totally possible, right? I mean, I'll say it'll probably be impossible for him to keep an ERA below 1 pitching in Cincinnati. But I think what's maybe the most interesting thing here is that through 4 starts, his fastball velocity is staying the same. Right. Last year we saw the fastball velocity basically drop off as the year went on, which makes sense, right? Fatigue sets in, and it is what it is. But the fact that he's been able to keep it through 4 starts is good to see. We'll see how long that goes. I think for Hunter Green, the velocity is what's going to carry him, right? Because he is throwing that fastball so much. It is allowing his slider and splitter to play off of that, but the fastball is still his most important pitch. So if that velocity continues to be where it is at right now, obviously he's not going to be throwing 99 in September. That's probably not what's happening. Um, but I think he can have good enough stats for the first 3 months to really establish himself as a Cy Young contender. Um, yeah, the numbers are insane right now. They're not going to stay where they are, but the rates might stay the same, right? A 31% strikeout rate, a 4% walk rate right now. Those seem doable to keep at what those current numbers are at. And if ERA goes up a little bit, the whip goes up a little bit, I don't think that's going to hurt his candidacy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think he has, obviously amazing stuff and amazing skills. The park is going to work against him a little bit. And it stinks that you have to be concerned about him throwing harder, like the way that things were last year with every single hard throwing, top 10 throwing starting pitchers all going on the IL. It's like you're excited that he's throwing harder and it's obviously making him dominant, but it's also like, is he going to break at some point? And, you can't really predict it, right? Like you just got to hope for the best here. He's a big guy. He throws hard. Hopefully he has a durable frame and he makes it through the whole season.
Yeah, I think maybe a few numbers to keep an eye out on that are maybe a little bit of an aberration right now. He's got a uh, this number is insane. He's got a 2.6% home run per fly ball rate with 3 games in Cincinnati.
Wow.
And we should note his fly ball rate this season is actually the highest it's been at nearly 60%.
Oh
Before
my
his fly
gosh.
ball rate was around 45%. Now it's up to 60%, which is incredible that the ball is somehow staying in the park, even though he's giving up that many fly balls. So there's maybe a tiny bit of luck that's involved here.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit, right? The home run per nine, 0.33, which is really small. But again, that's why he has a 0.98 ERA. It's not like if he all of a sudden gives up a couple home runs, now his ERA is going to balloon up to like the fours, right? He's still doing a really good job in limiting guys getting on base. So even a home run here, home run there, as he progresses to the mean, it's not going to hurt him as much. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Obviously, like you mentioned, the scary thing with Green is just going to be the injury, and that's not something that you can really predict.
Yeah, he's starting to give like Spencer Strider type vibes where like even if he has a bad outing in terms of earned runs, he's gonna have a lot of strikeouts and probably a decent whip, which is just a great floor.
Yes, for sure. All right, moving on to Monday. Thanks to Christian Ottoman for the Meisner misunderstood, or is it Misner misunderstood? It's a very good
I'm
question.
not
I
sure.
think,
I'm not sure,
yeah,
honestly.
I believe there was a debate. I forget where the debate was on how to pronounce Misner, but because of Christian's title, I'm going to say it's Misner misunderstood. But we're not going to talk about Misner. We're going to talk about Tyler Fitzgerald of the Giants. 3 for 4 with a double, a triple, a home run, and he was missing the single for the cycle, but did finish with 3 runs and 3 RBI. He hit his first homer of the season off Taiwan Walker. And then if you remember Tyler Fitzgerald, he had a 15 homer, 17 steal season, over 341 plate appearances in 2024. Really hot July and August, had 13 homers and 10 stolen bases across 179 plate appearances. The weird thing with that split though was that he had a lot of homers in July, not many homers in August, and very little stolen bases in July, and then a lot of stolen bases in August. I had him on one of my fantasy teams. July was a great month. I really enjoyed having him on my team, and then I dropped him in August because he was not hitting any homers anymore. This season, he's actually been pretty solid in the ratios. That's probably the one thing that he's been excelling in. But of course, he just hit his first homer of the season on Monday, so he's not been as productive in the counting stats. Fitzgerald should be someone who's available in most leagues. I would say check him out if you're looking for some help. But any thoughts on Tyler Fitzgerald? Is this a guy who you should be picking up, or is he just kind of someone who's just going to hit the occasional homer, get the occasional steal, and really is not going to be productive for your fantasy team throughout the week?
Yeah, I'm happy to see Uncle Tyler, my buddy, really breaking out here. No, just kidding. But he's been fun. He really kind of burst on the scene out of nowhere last year and has a really fun fantasy profile. I don't think it's gonna last, unfortunately. He has bad plate skills and contact skills. Like he's gonna be in the lineup because he's the starting second baseman for the Giants almost every day. So he has that going for him, right? That offers a little bit of floor, but he's gonna strike out a lot. He's not gonna walk a lot. So I don't think the batting average is really reliable, but I do think that the home runs and steals are reliable. He's a really athletic, explosive guy. So I think that a 2020 something like that is a reasonable expectation. You just gotta wonder what kind of batting average it's going to come with. And also I don't know how great the counting stats are going to be because he's probably going to hit towards the bottom of the order. It looks like he's hitting ninth against righties right now and sixth against lefties. But even still, like, I know that's not an endorsement, but he has pretty good positional eligibility. I think he's second short outfield in a lot of leagues, which
I
is
believe so.
really
Yeah.
useful. Um, so he's going to fall back to earth, right? He's outperforming his expected WOBA by like 60 points, which has to be among some of the leaders in the league. So there's going to be a slump, right? But I think that he still has a lot of utility because he has a great, just kind of fantasy profile as opposed to his real life hitting profile, which might not be quite as appealing.
Yeah, some important numbers to track for Fitzgerald just to kind of know where he's at. He's got a 314 average right now. Last season, he finished with a 280. One big reason why he's got a better average right now is he's striking out less. 31% strikeout rate last year. Right now has a 21% strikeout rate. If you start seeing that strikeout rate creep back up to where it was last season, and you see the average coming down, that's probably a good sign that maybe he is not as fantasy relevant as we're hoping him to be. Because again, right now the value he is providing is just in that average and the stolen base department, a little bit in the runs and RBI, but not that much again because he bats at the very bottom of that lineup. So some numbers to check out if you're interested in picking up Tyler Fitzgerald. If that strikeout rate goes up, though, I think that's maybe a good sign that maybe he is cooling down just a little bit.
Yeah, and I know that the strikeout rate has gone down, but the swinging strike rate has gone up. And I know that it looks like he's a good average hitter, but the projections have him at like a 240 to 245 type guy. So just don't be surprised when you see the batting average tank. It doesn't mean he's a useless player, but you just got to be realistic about what to expect here.
Exactly. Just one of those classic, like, keep him while he's hot and immediately drop him as soon as it looks bad.
Yeah.
Moving on to pitchers, thanks to Nick for the Holmes improvement SB Roundup article. Grant Holmes finally had a good start, so definitely check that article out if you want to read about that. But we are going to talk about Shane Baz of the Tampa Bay Rays. Got the win against Boston, 6 innings, 1 run, 2 hits, no walks, and 11 strikeouts. I am personally mad at myself because I don't have Baz in more leagues. I think I have him in one
Me
dynasty
too.
league, and I had the chance to pick him up in my home league. But at that, no, I currently on that team have Drew Rasmussen and Ryan Pepio, and picking up a third Tampa Bay Ray felt like the wrong move. But clearly that was a mistake because Boz has been absolutely shoving. And I think part of the reason I was scared about him and scared about most of the Tampa Bay pitchers this year was because they were moving from the Trop to George Steinbrenner Field, which is just significantly more hitter friendly than the Trop was. And yet, in 3 starts at home, Shane Baz has limited his whip to .84. His strikeout rate is at a 38%, which is insane. Yeah, so combine those numbers together. There's just not that many guys on base who can do damage. He's already had 2 double-digit strikeout games, and as long as his four-seam shape really maintains that really good height-adjusted VAA that he's pumping into the top of the zone, I think he'll continue to have success moving forward. But I think here's the question, Patrick. Shane Baz was not that great last year. He was like a pretty average pitcher. So is this version of Shane Baz the real one that we should be expecting for the rest of the season?
Yeah, it's been super impressive. I'm kicking myself for not having any shares. I think that what we've seen from him stuff wise so far is different than what he was last year. So I expect the results to be better. But it's also like, is it gonna stick, right? Like he's not really a guy who we can rely on to throw 180 or maybe even 160 innings. But also, we can't forget about how exciting of a pitcher he was when he first came up. He was, he wasn't Paul Skeens level pitching prospect hype, but he was really highly touted, and he showed, why in 2021 when he was really excellent. And he's kind of reverted back to the 2021 form, which is super impressive because he had a serious, arm injury and has thrown like 200 innings between now and then. So it's impressive to see him just kind of get back to his best self. So I think that as long as you're seeing that increased velo, sitting 97 or whatever it is exactly, yeah, I think that he's going to be great. I don't know if he's going to be like a top 10 starting pitcher, right? That might be a little bit unrealistic, but he is going to return big, big value for where you drafted him.
Yeah, maybe the one thing that gives pause is again he only has 3 starts, right? So this is an incredibly small sample size, and against the Angels specifically, last Tuesday, he gave up 4 walks in that start. But he's been going deep into games though. They're letting him pitch 95 plus pitches. Like you said, that velocity is back up to where it was in 2021, 2022, which is good to see. Even if the fastball shape just has not changed that dramatically from what we saw last year, I think the increased velocity is a good sign at least to understand why he's doing so well this year compared to where he was at last season.
Yeah, yeah, he's been probably behind Hunter Green, maybe the second most exciting pitcher so far. So jumping to Tuesday, April 15th, which was Jackie Robinson Day around the league. So I hope you all enjoyed, watching that action. On Tuesday, the hitter that I want to cover from Scott McDermott's The Horse You Rode In on hitter recap. It's not Alan Roden, but it is Alex Bregman, who we mentioned earlier. Went on the paternity list, but should be back this weekend. Alex Bregman went 5 for 5 in this game with a double, 2 homers, 2 runs scored, and 4 RBI. He, obviously moving to Boston, one of the highest profile signings of the offseason. He's just been incredible since he got there. He's been a real jolt to the lineup. He went yard twice in Steinbrenner Field for his first career 5-hit game. We've seen some interesting profile changes so far from Bregman. His exit velocity is up a lot. Average exit velocity, not the most useful stat, but to see a 4 mile per hour jump is a pretty big deal. He's also barreling balls at a career high rate. It seems like he's doing a little bit of a power for contact trade off, but he's a guy who rarely ever struck out before. So his 21% strikeout rate right now, even though it's 8 percentage points above his 13.5% career rate, it's still a below average major league rate. So he's hitting 357 with a 1.1 OPS. So Bregman's just been absolutely tearing the cover off the ball. He's a guy who I don't have in any leagues this year, but I always like him as like a mid-round third base target just because he's so consistent. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he can kind of replicate his Houston years in Boston.
Yeah, I really like the signing for Boston, just and for Bregman for the reason you mentioned of just peppering line drives off the Green Monster, right? Like that's just a haven for righties.
Mhm.
But the fact that he is such a disciplined hitter, right, increasing your strikeout rate by 8%, and he's still below league average, and that's just a skill that probably is never really going to go away from him, right? He's just going to be able to have good plate appearances. So even if he's selling out for a bit more power right now, specifically that barrel rate, right? It's a career high 9.8% right now. Again, small sample size, yada yada yada. It does stabilize around maybe like I think it's like stabilized around like 50 to 100 plate appearances. So, maybe that is real. That barrel rate is as high as it will be for the entire season. But yeah, I just think in terms of ratios, like moving to Fenway was a great move for him. In terms of the counting stats, the offenses are probably comparable, right? He had Jordan and Kyle Tucker in Houston. In Boston, he's got Rafael Devers and a host of really nice young players as well on that team. So
Mhm.
the counting stats probably would have stayed around the same, but it is nice to see him try to get a few more homers this season. It's not going to replicate the year that the insane year he had. I think it was 2018. I think or 2019 when Bregman went absolutely off. But if he can get to 25 homers this year, I'd be pretty happy with Bregman.
Yeah, he did a lot for his, fantasy value and also just real life batting line by going to Boston instead of I think Detroit was one of the other places that he was heavily considering. So yeah, if he was in Detroit, he's a guy who taps into his power primarily by pulling fly balls. He doesn't have like crazy natural power, so I think that this was a good landing spot for sure. Jumping to the pitching performance on the 15th, Jake Irvin was the headliner with the Irvin Magic SP Roundup article. Shout out to Magic Johnson. But I'm going to talk about Tyler Mahle. So Tyler Mahle went against the Angels. He threw 6 scoreless innings and got the win. He gave up 3 hits, 2 walks, and recorded 9 strikeouts, including 18 whiffs. So Mahle put up the golden goal on Wednesday, despite just sitting 92 miles per hour on the heater and only a 54% strike rate, and his slider went 0 out of 14 whiffs. So it was kind of a little bit of like a puzzling performance. How did he have such a great result? He also mixed in a splitter at 84, which, it's a pitch he's always had and has its moments, but it's not a Roki Sasaki type or Kevin Gossman type splitter. So, I think with this outing, it's nice to see him holding that 92 mile per hour velocity because he has good shape on the fastball. So as long as he's sitting around there, it's going to be an effective pitch. But how much of this is just the Angels struggling to make contact? So I think that you have to be excited about this outing, but also take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. And it looks like he's going to get a great test on Sunday against the Dodgers. It looks like he's going to face. So I don't think I'm starting him in most of my leagues for that, unless it's Sunday and in your head to heads, you got nothing to lose. But yeah, I think that Mahle, he's showing some signs of getting back to the guy he used to be after really dealing with some injuries, but seems like we're not quite buying into it fully.
Yeah, I have a complicated relationship with Molly because we traded Spencer Steer, Christian
Oh
Arcassian
yeah,
Strand
yeah.
for 9 starts of baseball over 2 years. Um, I mean, it'd be nice to see Molly succeed for sure, right? I think the fastball shape is kind of back to where he was when he was an elite pitcher with Cincinnati. Of course, kind of the issue with him being in Cincinnati for the longest time was like, well, he's giving up a lot of homers.
Yeah.
And now being in Texas, that issue is not as bad. So if he is kind of refining that fastball shape, that'd be really good. Of course, the problem is the velocity's down. So he needs every inch of that induced vertical break that he's got on that pitch. Um, yeah, I would like to see success from him. I think he of course the injuries have been just tough, right? Can't really blame a player for that for kind of just the lack of health, but he just was not
Mhm.
good last year. Now, granted, last year he only had 3 starts, but those were really 3 really discouraging starts. So the fact that he's started off this year in 4 starts looking really good is pretty impressive. Is he in rosterable territory? I think you could pick him up now and just not start him for the Dodgers and see if this is real. He's got some decent run support. He already has 3 wins on the season. Um, yeah, I think he could be good. I think the strikeout rate being where it is right now is good. The walk rate being where it is pretty bad though. 12%. That's don't like to see that. Um, but yeah, I think it could work. I think he would be a really good SP4 or SP5 on a team right now.
Yeah, yeah, I think that you're not gonna start him against the Dodgers, but it looks like he should get some relatively soft outings after that, like at the Giants, hosting Athletics, maybe Seattle. So, those are decent plays. The Molly trade thing is funny. I think that obviously the Twins lost the trade, but I think it gets blown out of proportion. Like CES and Spencer Steer are interesting fantasy players, but they're not really good defenders. And like Spencer Steer has put up some good numbers, but he's like a 2 WAR guy. So like obviously they lost the trade and they gave up those controllable young hitters, but I do think it gets blown a little bit out of the water. Like it's not the worst trade we've ever seen.
For sure. I think there's the joke right now that like Spencer Steers like made skills that he can hit, but he can't hit right now. So he doesn't really
Yeah.
offer that much value to the Reds right now, unfortunately. But yeah, giving up those young controllable assets for 9 starts of baseball is still a pretty rough trade off.
Yeah, it gives some shades of the Orioles, Trevor Rogers for Norby and
Oh
Stowers
yeah,
trade. I don't
for
think
sure.
that Stowers is anything special, and I think Norby's like an average regular, but I think we're
Yes.
gonna look back and regret it for sure.
Yeah. All right, moving on to Wednesday's games. Thanks to Kyle Stansel for the Thumpers from Big Dumper article. Of course, shout out to Big Kyle Raleigh, big fan of his. But we are not going to talk about Big Dumper. We are going to talk about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. of the Blue Jays. Went 2 for 3 with a homer, a run, two RBIs, and a walk because he finally hit his first homer of the season after signing a gigantic contract with the Jays. And everyone's saying like, "Oh, okay, now he's just going to coast because he's got the money." He finally got his first homer off Spencer Strider, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. He did have a 3rd inning RBI single, and then promptly got caught stealing, which really annoyed me because I have him in a league that does net steals, and so seeing that
Oh,
-1
geez.
show up next to Vlad's number, Vlad's name is never good because ideally that number should just be 0. I don't want Vlad
Yeah.
running at all, but the fact that he got caught stealing is super frustrating. Anyways, despite the fact that he just hit his first homer, he's actually had a pretty solid season. 292 average, 373 OBP. Of course, that slugging is down because he's just not hitting homers, but I think the ground ball rates and the fly ball rates are about where they were at last year. He's not doing anything dramatically different at his approach to the plate, and so even so, the ratios look good. The counting stats are okay, and I would expect those power numbers to go up as the season goes on. Just any thoughts on Vlad's early season struggles? Anything we should be worried about, or is this just business as usual?
Yeah, yeah. First shout out to Cal Raleigh. He had a combo meal today. I think he's at like 8 homers and 3 steals, so he's just going crazy. So good for him. But yeah, with Vladdy, I mean, he's a great hitter, right? We all know that. I think that one thing that's frustrating about him is he year to year has a lot more variance than like the top drafted hitters. Like Freddie Freeman is someone who's just so consistent. Bryce Harper, like Mookie Betts, like those kind of guys where he was getting drafted. They overall their production, over the last 3 years might be similar to Vlad's, but he just has so much variance. Like you just don't know quite what you're going to get from him, which is a little bit frustrating. But I think you just gotta hold him, and he's going to go on a power binge at some point, and hopefully get over like the 30 mark. And if he goes like 330, I mean, you can't be upset about that.
Yeah, I think with Vlad, he is very much more suited to be rostered in a roto league than a week to week league.
Hmm.
I think that's the case with most baseball players. Is that obviously baseball is incredibly streaky, and so it's just nice to have guys in a roto as opposed to a week by week thing. But I think that inconsistency from month to month is maybe something a little frustrating with Vlad. And yet, like he's doing all this, and he's still like almost hitting 300, so you can't really get mad at that. But moving on to pitchers, thanks to Nick for the Spence You've Been Gone SP Roundup article, obviously referring to Spencer Strider, who we mentioned earlier, had his first first major league start of the season, going against Toronto. 5 innings, 2 earned runs, 5 hits, 1 walk, and 5 strikeouts. Went 97 pitches, which is pretty impressive. Um, you could have watched along with the Pitcher List team on Playback if you were checking out that start. Definitely check out our daily MLB streams there. But anyways, he looked really good in the first inning. 96-mile-an-hour four seamers, sliders that were doing pretty solid. But then he dropped off in that third inning where, again, he gave up that RBI single to Vlad. But because of the replay review with Vlad getting the caught stealing, it actually gave Strider a little bit of rest during that inning. And he definitely needed it because his fastball velocity was dropping, and it finally got back up to, I think, 95, 96 for the rest of that inning. Overall, I think the start was fine. It just wasn't the elite Strider we expected. Right, only 5 strikeouts. We'd like to see that number go up because his strikeout rate is pretty crazy. But again, I think that comes with just more games as he builds up the stamina, gets more feel for his pitches against major league hitting. Right, it's a lot easier to cook single A and triple A batters than it is to pitch against major league talent. I would say, Strider's just going to have a few more shaky starts. Right, it's probably going to take 2 to 4 more starts for him to really feel like that version of Strider that we knew from 2023. But I think he's still a really solid guy. I would not be worried about trotting him out against any opponent right now. I think the thing to watch out for is just where is his velocity in the second half of his starts, right? Is it staying at that 95, 96 mile an hour range, or is it dropping lower? Again, this is a guy who in his completely healthy would be throwing 97, 98, right? So the velocity is going to need a bit to get back to where it was before. But yeah, any thoughts on Spencer Strider and this start specifically, and then also the rest of the season outlook for him?
Yeah, I think that analysis is spot on. He's a guy he gets a lot of strikeouts, but he can be prone to hard contact at that time. So if he's losing a little bit on the fastball, it's going to make that problem just a little bit worse. His velo was down in his rehab starts too, which is something that I was following. So it's not like this is a one-time thing. But it's just great to see him back on the mound. He's not, an ace yet, but how many people are right away when they return from elbow surgery? So yeah, hopefully he can build up to 6 innings in his next start, and just consistently perform. Like you said, you're running him out there every time. There might be some 4 earned run outings if he gives up a couple home runs, but the strikeouts should be there, and so should the whip. So yeah, he's definitely one of the most important guys to just monitor the velocity. Obviously, you care about how hard all your pitchers are throwing, but he's definitely up there among the guys where like I'm checking like the baseball savant, game cast and seeing like what's his average velo compared to the rest of the season, because that's something where you need to see, good numbers from him.
And it almost feels like it's more important for Strider because he is just a two-pitch pitcher, right, with that fastball slider combo, right? That's his bread and butter essentially. So the fastball needs to be really good for him to succeed. Not saying that he can't succeed when it's lower at the 95 mile an hour velocity, right? He still had a 29% CSW in this start, so looking really good. But I think for him as a guy who really is known more as the two-pitch pitcher, that fastball needs to be pretty elite for him to have elite results.
Yeah, definitely agree.
All right, so that wraps it up for our recaps, and now we're going to move into streamers for next week. But before we do that, maybe just a recap of who we picked last week and how they did.
Yeah, sure. It was kind of mixed results. Obviously, we talked about Fitz earlier. He went down with the injury, so we didn't, got an incomplete on that one. But Mitchell Parker was the biggest win. He went 6 innings and gave 1 run with 6 strikeouts. I think he had a 1 whip or maybe a .83 with 5 base runners. He unfortunately didn't get the win because the Nats didn't give him any run support, but strong outing. Landon Knack was kind of a push. He went 4 1/3 with 2 earned runs and got the no decision against the Rockies. For some reason, I think they pulled him with nobody on and 2 outs from being eligible for a win. So that's a little bit frustrating. And then Taiwan Walker pitched poorly, but not terribly. He went 4 earned runs in 5 innings with 5 strikeouts. He has another start coming up against the Marlins this weekend. I don't know. I think you probably start him. It's the Marlins, right? Like, I know Taiwan Walker's not good, but how much damage could they really do? Depends on your matchup or what the categories are, but I don't think it's the worst option in the world in your deeper leagues, which is what I recommended last time. And then looking ahead to this week, I was able to come up with some decent, mostly deeper league options from my expected SP schedules article that went up earlier this week, where we look at the next 4 turns through the rotation for every single pitcher in the league. It's a really useful article that's a lot of work to put together, but gives great insight on not only targeting guys for next week, but targeting guys for the next couple weeks, and kind of helps you lay out your team really well. So I found it pretty insightful. Kicking it off would be Michael Lorenzen. He's like your classic Toby type who gets in like the 80 to 100 range of Nick's top 100. He pitched today against the Tigers and it was kind of iffy, but he gets an even easier matchup next time out. He's facing the Rockies on the road, just like Landon Knack was last week. He's a good option in wins leagues or quality starts leagues. He's one of those super deep Arsenal guys. Throws 6 pitches and should be able to kind of churn through the Rockies lineup. Next is David Festa. He is 8% owned in Yahoo, 2% on ESPN. Lorenzen didn't say that. He's 8% on Yahoo and 4% on ESPN. Festa gets also one of the easiest matchups out there, which is the White Sox at home. This is a good wins league play specifically because Festa has only worked 9 innings total in his first 2 starts. They've been scoreless, which has been great, but he's probably not going to go 6. And then a kind of combo for the final options. Very deep options. Again, just to reiterate, don't go stream these guys in your 10 teamers and 12 teamers. I would say they're a maybe. It's Tyler Anderson and Jack Kahanowitz, both on the Angels. Angels get an easy schedule next week. For Anderson specifically, he's 4% Yahoo, 2% ESPN, and he has a 2-start week, 2 home starts, Giants and Pirates. Pirates, one of the worst offenses in the league right now. Giants kind of middle of the pack. And then Kahanowitz just gets 1 start against the Pirates. He's a sinker baller, jack of one trade, Nick calls him. He pitched kind of poorly tonight against the Rangers, but Rangers, Pirates, big matchup differential there. So they are kind of deeper quality start and AL only league plays.
Yeah, I think for the Angels players, I'll probably stay away from those guys. Kahanowitz is just so interesting because the guy like legitimately throws like 70% sinkers and gets
Yep.
away with it. Tyler Anderson has some hot streaks. I think in terms of a 2-start week, that's not bad, right? He's probably the deep league streamer.
Yeah,
In that
exactly.
case, if you're in a weekly league, and yeah, I mean, I like Festa and Lorenzen. Obviously, I'm a big Festa guy. I think he looked pretty good, and in the start on Friday, I was there. He got out of a couple jams, but really showed that he was able to strike guys out. He doesn't have elite stuff, but he does all right. And against a team like the White Sox, who for the most part haven't shown too much offense, I think that's a really good wins play there. And then with Lorenzen, you get Rocky Road, you might as well go for it.
Mhm.
He's got a decent offense behind him. It hasn't been that great, unfortunately, but when you have Bobby Witt Jr. behind you, anything can happen. So, yeah, I like all those guys. Tyler Anderson and Coach it's not as much, but I think in the right league context, it makes sense, right? If you are in a league that limits your starts, I think Tyler Anderson's a really good pickup because you don't have to make multiple waiver wire pickups to get to a guy with a 2-start week. So yeah, all really interesting streamer picks that probably have a better chance of panning out than not.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a gap there, right? It's like Festa and Lorenzen are the A options, and then Kahanowitz and Anderson are the B options. Like if you're in a shallower league, don't just go add Anderson because Festa and Lorenzen aren't available. Like really think about like how deep your league is and if it really makes sense for what your team needs.
Yeah, especially like don't add him for that San Francisco start. Right? Like you don't have to if you're in a
Mhm.
daily league, right? You can pick him up for that Pittsburgh start instead, and that's kind of the understanding your league context and what you're trying to get, right? If you're a quality start league, Festa's probably not your guy, but in a wins league, all these guys could have some play.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that wraps it up for today's podcast. Again, you can find us on This Week PL on Twitter. Send us your comments and questions at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. You can find myself on Twitter at the John K, and you can find Patrick on Twitter at pfitzgerald_99. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Pitcher List podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you listen to your podcast, and leave us us a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. Lastly, sign up for Pitcherless Pro. By doing so, you can join us in the Pitcherless Discord, get advice from all the fantasy experts and writers over there. Also, just another plug for the Playback stream. That we've got MLB games going every single day. Join the conversation there. It's always a fun time. But yeah, that is all for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of This Week in Fantasy Baseball. For Patrick, I'm John, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, everyone.